Born in Beloit, Wisconsin, on August 31st of 1937.
Tell me your parents' names.
Eldon Hahn and Arabella, maiden name Wolfram Hahn. My dad's family, or would have been my grandfather, came from Germany in about 1887. Following a number of other Han families from that same group of families that started immigrating from Germany in 1860-ish. And then over that period of 25 years, there was like 6 brothers that came, and they were all farmers and probably left Germany principally, well, economically, but the Prussian Wars went on and on forever. And in Germany, they would take all the farm men and put them in the military in the winter, but then run them back to the farms in the summer so they could raise food for continuing the war. So anyway, that was probably what precipitated that migration from a lot of people at that particular time. Anyway, that was, and most of my family farmed from Clinton to Beloit and had most of the farms between here and there. So they all settled kind of in progression, all helped each other farm. Trying to think what else special there. That's pretty much it. Now, my mother's family came from Elkhorn, and my grandmother's husband died early, like 45-ish. Tuberculosis was kind of rampant at that time. And so she had 4 children, had to make a living, and sought a place in Clinton to open a restaurant. And ultimately did catering for some of the, well, one particular big road building crew, who ended up, the owner of that ended up being my step-grandfather.
Okay.
And so that was basically the family. Then one other kind of unique thing about my mother's family, there was 1 boy and 3 girls. And the 3 girls were part of a team that played for the Clinton Aces after high school in a kind of a semi-pro basketball league. And they traveled, and other teams came to Clinton. They played in the YMCA building in Clinton, and they came from as far away as Chicago. And their uniforms and some of that memorabilia is here in the house, so it's kind of nice. We preserved some of that, and the photos of the team and etc.
Yeah.
Wasn't a big team, but it's kind of unique. We think of girls basketball kind of being a newer thing in the scope of things, but if you think about that, this is in the probably late 20s,
Yeah.
early 30s, that women were playing that kind of level of basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of neat.
Yeah. We know that your family owned and operated a grocery store. Are those your earliest memories? What your parents did to provide the family a living?
Well, that's what they did. They bought a grocery store when they were in their very early 20s, and principally because my dad didn't want to milk cows by hand, and his dad wasn't going to put it in a milking machine, so he said, forget it, I think we're going to go to town and buy this grocery store. And it was a store that my mother had worked at during high school, so she knew about the grocery business at that time. And so they rented for quite a number of years, eventually then buying a building which now is part of the DeLong Company, and kind of expanded. And as years went on, that Clinton was a bustling small town, but we had like generally 3 grocery stores and a meat market and some other smaller satellite grocery operations, kind of unique. And we had 3 hardware stores, and we had 2 clothing stores, which were really unique for a small town. One dealt with probably a little dressier fare, and the other one probably a little more basic kind of clothing. And we had, obviously we had a movie theater, and we had a pharmacy, and we had lots of things. People would congregate on Friday or Saturday night downtown just socially.
Yes.
So that was the early years, how bustling it was. They'd double park, leave the keys in the car. If you had to move somebody, you'd just get in whoever's car and move it a little bit so you could move your car. So it was really a kind of a friendly.
Sure. Now, how many siblings do you have?
I had just one, a brother,
Okay.
and he was pretty much involved in the grocery store, and eventually he kind of took over from my parents, and short period, few years, decided to move to Delavan and bought a little bigger store there and ran that for a couple years, and then gave that up and moved to Florida.
And what are your earliest memories of working in the store? Because I would imagine you probably did at a pretty young age.
Well, I basically did a lot of ordering, a lot of that type of thing, did a lot of the office kind of thing. So I really kind of learned a lot of trades. I learned how to cut meat and just about anything you can imagine. But compared to today, I mean, have 3 grocery stores and be all making a reasonable living and being busy, it's quite unique at that time.
Did you work in the store in high school?
I worked, oh yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yes.
And what were your favorite parts of working in the store? If you recall the ups and the enjoyable parts of it.
It's just kind of managing, realizing that you have to buy at a certain price and sell at a certain price that fits people's budgets and whatever, and plus getting to know people and their things that they need and want and what they expect. And that personal contact with people was very important. It still is.
Sure.
Yeah, that's
Like
if you can help them figure out the best way to do something or even buy whatever, you always try to work with people to get what works best for them if you think you can figure it out.
Right. Well, let's go back to your youth again. Where did you go to grade school?
Clinton.
And you remember which building it was?
Well, it's the old one that is no longer there.
Okay.
And of course, high school, you went right from grade school to high school, and I worked all the time. So that was just whatever. That was just.
Where did you live in Clinton? I presume in the village?
Right. I lived on the corner of Cross and Allen, kind of a 2-story, but a very walk-up attic, big kind of neat house. But I lived there for quite a number of years. And I think if I dial back just a little bit, I think is kind of unique at my age to remember some of World War II, growing up in that era, and how the country as a whole came together tremendously to support that war effort. I mean, that was all anybody thought about was, how can we help the war effort? Everyone had a victory garden. Didn't matter what status or whatever you were, whatever other occupation you had, you still had a garden. You worked it whenever you had spare time after hours or whatever. Everybody had a victory garden. And we saved everything, every scrap of paper. We had a paper press in the grocery store, and every tissue paper or whatever, because the fruit came wrapped in tissue paper, and so every piece of paper went in that for the war effort. Aluminum foil, bacon grease, everything, that's all kinds of things. And at that time, we had a depot in Clinton, and most of our, well, not a good share of the freight came on rail. And particularly things from California, the fruits and vegetables, and we would have to go down to the depot and pick up our order, take it to the store and put it out. And one other thing that's probably a little unique too is in school we had drives for the war effort. We would pack up things and send them over, and we had clothing drives. And I remember I had a long coat winter coat that I had outgrown, and I put my name and address in the pocket, and it went to a girl in Poland, and I communicated or wrote back and forth to her for, till I was a freshman in high school. I still have her last letter, and she sent me her first communion wafer and told that that coat was what saved her life that first winter. So kind of unique.
That's a great story.
And then probably other people have had that experience, but it really was neat. And she would always write in Polish, and I had to find someone to translate it, but it was kind of neat. But anyway, that was kind of that era.
What year did you graduate from high school?
In 1955.
Okay. Do you still have friends today in the Clinton area that you went to school with?
There's a few people in the area that we don't really particularly do any specific things, but yes, there's people that are around. A lot of people have gravitated out of the area.
Sure.
And then I did go to Milton College for 1 year after high school, and that was about the time that there was a draft on, and I was looking at the options. It was Cold War, but there was still a draft. You had to fulfill your obligation. And I had a couple of cousins that were in the Wisconsin National Guard, 32nd Division, and they encouraged me to consider that because of the lesser time of active duty. And since I felt I had some responsibilities with my parents for the grocery store, I opted for that route, and I was in for probably a year and a half, and then they activated our division, the 32nd Division, because of the Berlin Wall crisis. And so they sent us to Washington, the state of Washington, and spent a year there. And plus I had spent already about 6 months or so in California prior to that. And while I was there, I basically, a little scope of what I did in the military, I was a fire direction computer for the 81 mortars. However, I well, they sent me to the school for a little bit, and whoever scored well were to set up another new school for CBR, chemical, biological, and radiological warfare. And since especially the nuclear thing with Cuba acquiring and getting nuclear capabilities from Russia, this was a pretty strong point. There's a whole story that goes along with President Kennedy that tells why all this happened. But anyway, he ended up teaching atomic warfare for the majority of the time that I was in Washington. And that was all classroom stuff, and we had to train a certain portion of the 20,000 that were there in our division, so it took quite a while. And we had to have a security clearance, actually a couple security clearances to acquire the material to be able to present the classes. It was kind of a unique experience too.
Quite a contrast from your small town days then.
Yes.
Change.
Yeah.
Well, when did you come back then?
Well, let's see. I'm not sure of that exact year, but we came back, and I went back into the grocery store for a bit and pursued a sport that I really, really loved. That was skiing. And I did a fair amount of downhill skiing whenever I could and wherever. Squeezed it in on a Sunday, maybe drive to Wausau and ski all day and then drive back that same day. And then ultimately met my wife at Iron Mountain, Michigan on a skiing excursion. And eventually then we got married in '66.
Okay.
And a couple of years later, actually in '69, January 1st of '69, I bought Dahlman Hardware and kind of moved on from that.
Was it the challenge? You knew a lot about a small business. I mean,
Sure.
you know, was it the challenge of running it, you know, yourself that kind of spurred you that way? Or what was your motivation, I guess?
Well, I wanted to be in charge. There's quite a bit of, I mean, that kind of what I wanted my own business and be in charge of it. I either make it or if I don't, it's my fault if I don't make
Right.
it.
Yeah. Obviously, going with Ace Hardware was a smart move. I mean, do you remember what led to that decision?
Well, the store was buying their hardware from a company that was kind of defunct out of Madison called 𝘎𝘭𝑒. And I knew I couldn't make it with a unreliable wholesaler. I knew it, and I felt at the time, because we had a True Value store in town, that subscription wouldn't be available. It's not a franchise, it's a subscription, stockholder subscription. That's how they're both run. So I knew that what I felt Ace was the best option, and I contacted them in Chicago, and they sent out people or a person to interview, and we made a deal that they would sell me, and just proceeded from there.
And how many years did you, I mean, I know that, well.
We started,
Yeah.
I made the deal on New Year's Day, 1969, with the previous owner,
Right. And when did it become Ace?
right away.
Right away? Okay.
Right, yeah,
I do remember the 𝘎𝑗 name and the product. So,
right, yeah, that wasn't I think I might have bought from 𝘎𝑗 a couple of times, but I think probably by the middle of the month, Carol and I went to Chicago for a hardware convention at the Hilton downtown, stayed overnight, bought hardware for the store. This was only a couple of weeks after we, had signed the papers, and we were on our way.
Now, you bought it from Glenn Dahlman, right?
Correct.
Do you remember much about Glenn?
Sure.
Was he an easy person to deal with? I only remember maybe meeting him once or twice.
Well, yeah, Glenn was a bachelor, fantastic organ player, interested in his church music and his organ, and that was basically it. He pretty much was pretty hard-nosed about things. If he had a price for something, that would be the price, and if you didn't like it, too bad, then go somewhere else. And he had another person actually shopping the hardware store to consider buying it, but he wasn't going to deal with anybody that wanted to negotiate prices. He said, "This is my price, and that's it." And actually, when I heard it was for sale from 𝘎𝘵𝘶, I quickly called up Glenn and said, "I think I'm very interested." And he said, "Well, come on down." So I went down on New Year's Day in the afternoon, and I said, "Boy, I'll take it." I didn't say anything about price. I didn't know that he was going to be hard-nosed about the price, but it was okay. I was going to buy it. That was it.
Now, how many years did you manage it before you turned it over to Dan?
I had it for 35 years, and then Dan bought it in '02.
Okay.
And we've kept the buildings, and through the course of time, we bought one building from 𝘎𝘭𝘠𝘠𝘵, actually his daughter, 𝘠𝑉𝑚, but that was a progression. That was a good move, but it took about a year to get the building prepped so I could move into it. And then, to remember the exact year, I bought the next building in '82 from Reader Gilbank, and we took the wall out in between to expand. And then in 1997, I bought the bank property, and that allowed us parking, which I thought was, if we were going to grow downtown, I would need that. And always looking at considering moving out of downtown, but I always kind of felt loyal to downtown, that it'd be nice to keep that Main Street active retail if it's possible. So there was a time when there was a lumberyard south of town on Highway 140 available for a reasonable price, and I thought really hard about that, moving out to the edge of town. That was a trend kind of then. Some of our friends in other hardware settings were doing similar, moving out of their smaller communities to the edge of town. Well, I ended up staying downtown. And for whatever, I mean, it worked out for us, but at this point now, generally looking ahead, most shopping or whatever hardware stores would be at the edge of town.
Yeah.
Yeah, with
You've seen, you lived in Clinton, you've seen the heydays, I call it the heydays of the 50s and 60s. And small towns everywhere have struggled, I mean, in more recent years. And we
Sure.
understand why, and it's just the nature of the cycle of life, you could say. But if you've thought, I'm sure you've thought a lot over the years of how a small downtown like Clinton can survive. I mean, what do you think could happen, should happen, you'd love to see happen in downtown Clinton to I mean, I think it's got some possibilities.
Well, as far as hardware is concerned, it's possible that at some point someone who has a reasonable amount of funds available or whatever, or credit to build something at the edge of town, but it's really pretty expensive to, property and develop it, and to shelve it and stock it, could be $1.5 to $2 million. And then you have to have turns enough to make it work. And that's kind of the key with almost any business. You have to be able to turn your inventory a reasonable number of times to be profitable. And you can see that happening in even some of the bigger box stores, where they don't carry, if something doesn't sell enough in a period of time, they don't carry it.
Yeah.
So that was one of the advantages we had years ago, because we could have, like, for example, 7/16 bolts. Well, you can't go, you go to Menards to get a 7/16 bolt, and a carriage, they don't have them. So where do you get them? Well, there are other outlets like Fastenal, and those are, to go into Fastenal and buy a bolt, it maybe costs a huge amount.
Right.
Because it's labor intense, and when you just buy a couple 7/16 bolts, nobody else has them. So anyway, it's possible, but it's a big investment for a small town. And in the interim, we did look at a couple other areas to expand. We looked at Darien and Sharon with some influence from people in those two communities to have a satellite. We did many demographics to see if there's a possibility, and basically, no. They felt it wasn't feasible at all. I mean, I could do whatever if I wanted to anyway, but you have to take advice and realize what the numbers are.
Right.
So those two were out, little smaller communities and et cetera. And you can't go to the west because that's pretty much occupied by the Harris family and Reimers. And we did at one time look pretty strongly at Monroe. That was been a hardware store, a little stretch, but couldn't convince the family to want to move to Monroe because it felt we needed to be based, kind of. And Dan was just getting out of college.
Yeah.
And he was doing some other financial work. So.
Well, I only have a couple more questions, I think, for you, Bruce. But
Sure.
I know that Jefferson Prairie Lutheran Church has been a big part of your life. Just tell me a little bit about what it's meant to you, being involved with the church
Sure.
and a part of the church.
Well, we've been members ever since we got married, and quite active with a lot of things. I've been on council, I think, 4 or 5 times for a period of time, which I'm on currently. And Carol's taught Sunday school there for 40-some years. And she, loves the kids. She teaches the younger kids. And they will still come back after years, and that's kind of neat. Plus, she's very involved with the altar guild and likes things very precise and et cetera. So she does a really, great job with all of that. Which, going back just a little bit, long as we talk about Carol a minute, when we bought that bank property, we converted it to an ice cream shop, which we had someone else run it for 2 years, and then they moved on, and Carol ran it for 5 years. And it was kind of fun. It was a lot of work, not particularly profitable, but she made a point of having a lot of girls work for her, and pretty much one from every church if she could arrange it, which would help to cater in people from that church to come in and get ice cream because they wanted to see their kids working at the ice cream shop. She had cute outfits, and I think I had a couple pictures in there too that are kind of show that off, but yeah, it was neat.
But long hours, weekend hours too.
Yes, those 5 years were a lot of work.
Well,
But it was kind of neat. It was kind of fun too.
sure, you got to meet people.
Had a lot of treats.
Yeah. Now, I know that you've never been really retired full-time because you've always been involved at the store. I mean, what would you like to do with your free time going forward now? When you have more free time, you won't be involved with the store quite as much. What would you like to do?
Well, I'll probably catch up on things at home, and I'm sure it will allow me a little more time to probably do a little better catch up on things at church. And also we have a cottage up near Minocqua, which we've had for some time, and maybe we'll spend a little more time there. Possibly travel a little. We've traveled a number of times with a group of folks that we kind of enjoy going with, and hopefully we'll pursue that again a little bit. So.
One thing I want to ask you is, what words of wisdom would you have for young people that might be watching this in terms of, I guess, how they live their life, or if they have a small business, they want to run a small business, what would you suggest?
Wow. Well, you kind of have to have that entrepreneurial spirit to begin with, and you want to be your own boss, and if you are, then you can pursue it with all your heart to make it work, and you have to be willing to spend lots of hours. I think you have to be kind of prudent with your finances, and of course, responsibility. If you're going to do that, you want to be responsible to your family. I mean, you're doing it, I assume, in most cases, to support your family, so that responsibility factor is important. Respect and responsibility are very important, and just being independent to be the boss.
Good advice. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to mention, talk about that maybe I've overlooked? I mean, this is not meant to be a biography of everything that happened in your life, but can you think of anything else that you might want to just mention?
Well, I can't keep bouncing around here, but I see kind of a slack in church attendance, and I think back, it's always been kind of important to us when our kids were in kind of a youth group era, like that 14 to 16 to 18 age group. We'd have 25, 30 kids, and we took them up to our place up north a number of years, taught them how to ski if they didn't know how, and swim and canoe and all the different things that you would in that setting. And we always had a church service, and when we came back to church, that would be our church service at our own home church with what we put on up north. And I think all those things were kind of neat. And it's kind of sad to see all of that kind of diminish. It just is kind of going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But those were good years. And
Well, I thank you, Bruce. On behalf of the Clinton Community Historical Society, I thank you for participating in this interview, and we just wish you good luck, and you and Carol for many years to come. Good
Sure.
well wishes.
well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Don.
You're welcome.